Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in a very dark, grim, cold, menacing, bleak Budapest. And it's not getting any better. I'd say, oh, well, the days are getting longer. No, they're not. There's nothing much here to lift your spirit. However, one thing that does lift my spirit is being here with Gagglers and everybody who has joined us. Welcome. Really appreciate your being here. And a couple of so interesting things to talk about. Obviously, in the east coast of the United States, in Washington, D.C., it's now 3:11 p.m. And of course, the big story in D.C. is the big Pete Hegseth um, confirmation hearings. And as always with these confirmation hearings, they're extraordinarily pointless and unenlightening. And we're all supposed to take it all very seriously and pretend to act very interested and think that there's something really constructive and important and intriguing that's going on. But in fact, they're a complete waste of time. We know already that every single Democrat will vote against Hegseth. And so the only issue is, well, how many Republicans will he lose? The questioning is entirely pointless because the Democrats are all there to try, either to try to catch him out or to point to his various shortcomings, and then to tell the world that, well, I don't think I've given the matter some thought. I don't think I'm going to be voting to confirm you because you have all these shortcomings, and so it's all a piece of theater because all these questions, all very aggressive, all very hostile, and they're not really interested in the answers because the moment he begins to answer, he's cut off. They're saying, "Hey, that was a yes or no question. That you got to be it's either a yes or a no, or indeed." The moment he starts answering a question, the immediate interruption, and there's the next question. It's a real trick whereby it seems like he's not really answering the question because the person asking the question isn't listening to the answer and is already throwing out the next question, just as stupid and just as hostile as the previous question. And so it goes on. So in fact, there's nothing going on here that would suggest that there's any kind of debate, that this is a confirmation process whereby senators want to know answers to their questions. They're not asking questions in order to get answers. They're just asking questions in order to show, that, hey, I was really grilling him, so they can come on CNN later on in the day and do a fist bump about how well they did in asking these questions. Now, of course, the Republicans themselves are not asking questions at all because, of course, their job is to guide Hegseth through. So essentially, they're there to say what a fine young man he is. And here I have another letter of commendation from somebody or other, and I want to enter it into the record. And so, they're not asking any questions either. They just want to, get themselves on the record to say what a fine young man Pete Hegseth is, and then they might throw in a nice softball question. Well, do you think that there needs to be more done to increase discipline in the military, or do you think that you think there should be more fat cut from the Pentagon bureaucracy? So that a total waste of time, and as predictable. And I think that gives you a flavor of the coming hearings, with the exception of Marco Rubio. And because Marco Rubio will be the one nominee who will enjoy the the prestige of bipartisan support. I mean, they'll be, bipartisan. Oh yes, yes, right. We Democrats, we're not automatically rejectionists. Look, we're supporting Marco Rubio. So yes, I think the Marco Rubio hearings, I think they're later this week. I think there will be a love fest, and I'm sure he's going to glide through with 80, 85 votes in favor. So that's ahead. Now, in the meantime, this and we're still at a level of speculation, because we have been here before, and we've been led up the garden path before. But the negotiations over a possible Israel Hamas ceasefire seem to be actually quite serious this time. I mean, again, we may be wrong. We've heard this before, but to the outside observer, we're obviously not there at the negotiating table. To the outside observer, it does seem that we're quite close to an agreement. And here, I have to say, surprisingly, and pleasantly surprisingly, it seems as if Trump played the decisive role in possibly securing this ceasefire, because all of the indications are from Israel that Netanyahu, who's basically accepted the kind of agreement that that had been offered for months and months and months. There's nothing at all in this agreement that wasn't already available, from last summer. It's another one of these phases. There's going to be an initial phase, I think 42 days, during which the Hamas will release an initial batch of hostages, something like 33 hostages, mostly women and children, and then in return, Israel will release Palestinian prisoners. So that's the first phase, and then after 16 days, I think there'll be negotiations about the second phase. During the second phase, Hamas, I think, will release all of the hostages, and then Israel will release, I think, more obviously Palestinian prisoners. But the most significant part of that second phase will be the return of Gazan residents who are now in the south of Gaza, their return to the north. Israel, I think, will impose some kind of a buffer zone around Gaza, and Israel will begin withdrawing from Gaza. So that's all part of that. And then I guess the third phase, because I think this is the talk here, is that this is a ceasefire. I mean, all this time there's a ceasefire in place, and after that, after this exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners has been completed, they're going to, and Israel has withdrawn from Gaza. Then there'll be presumably some kind of negotiations on the political future of Gaza. All of the issues that Netanyahu had previously put forward as a kind of deal breakers, like the Philadelphia corridor, that's kind of gone. I mean, I think that Netanyahu has withdrawn that as the condition, and and then there's the the Rafah crossing. I think that's going to be open. Um, and but I think what significant here is the role that Trump's special envoy in the Middle East played here. This is coming from the Israeli media. The Israeli media that this was Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, who went to see Netanyahu and clearly told him that Trump wants this done, and that Netanyahu needs to get with the Trump program. And that is somewhat surprising. That isn't quite what we had expected, and it's not quite what. Well, significantly, it's not quite what the Israelis had expected. They'd expected unconditional support from Trump, but that wasn't coming. I mean, it was Trump who really told Netanyahu that he needs to agree to this, because this deal, there's nothing about it that's new. It's exactly the same deal that was rejected by Netanyahu months ago. Now, we don't really know whether this is going to happen. I mean, at the moment, it just that's the news from Qatar, which is that they're saying, well, everyone's very close to the deal. Hamas says that they're very close. The Israelis saying very close, but there are obviously rumblings within the Israeli cabinet, from the usual people, the Ben Gvir, Smotrich. They're threatening to resign. If they resign, of course, then the government of Netanyahu collapses, and of course that's always been the nightmare scenario for Netanyahu, that his government is over. So I don't know, but I think that it's very interesting. The stories, these are stories that's published in Israel, in Haaretz, that was Trump who had applied pressure on Netanyahu to come to an agreement. And if that does happen, then it's a searing indictment of the Biden regime, which hadn't applied any kind of pressure at all this time on Netanyahu. I mean, the fact that somehow Trump can come in and apply this pressure, basically, hey, we're the United States. If you want to keep in with us, you have to do what we say. And that's why when Biden yesterday, at the State Department, was speaking about how what a great man he is, what a fantastic foreign policy accomplishments. He of course has no foreign policy accomplishments. He's been an unmitigated disaster. But here, this was a total disaster, because the idea that the U.S. government has no means of applying pressure on Israel is laughable. It's absolutely laughable. He's basically given a blank check, complete blank check to Israel, and there was always means to apply pressure. So that's why, if this happens, if there is a ceasefire, and maybe the beginning of the end of this war in Gaza, then it will have to be on Trump, and that again will be quite interesting, because then if it will be Trump, and if the word will get back to in Washington, because at the moment it's all just being written about in Israel, about the pressure that's come from Witkoff, who's speaking on behalf of Trump. But if word gets back, then we'll see how Trump's Zionist allies will respond to how they will respond to Trump's apparently stabbing Bibi in the back, because that's how they'll say it, and that's how Bibi is presenting his apparent agreement to this ceasefire. That, hey, I mean, what can I do? I mean, I got pressure applied against me by Trump, and and so that's so we'll see what well, how the Zionist bloc within the administration will respond to that. And then speaking of that, just going back to Hexeth and why these hearings are so pointless, that no one actually brings up the very contentious views that Hexeth holds, particularly about the building of the third temple in Jerusalem, his fervent, hysterical Zionism, again from somebody who's not a Jew himself, and and no one talks about that. Instead, you get during the hearings today, you get these attacks on him for extramarital affairs. Now, the problem there, of course, is that the Democrats are not in a strong position to bring up that issue because, of course, they covered for Bill Clinton during the Clinton years and had insisted that, however disreputable his his sexual goings on were, they didn't affect his performance of his job. So, if that's the argument they used for Bill Clinton, then they have to accept the same thing for Hegseth. So they're not in a particularly strong position on that. And some of the Republicans kind of picked up on this because I think there was that guy Tim Kaine, who in particular raised this issue. Hey, we got a wife, and she's just given birth, and you're already going in, you're getting hanky panky with other women. It's kind of sordid, but on the other hand, I don't know, that's what politicians do. So I mean, it's depressing, obviously, watching it, and again, completely pointless. I mean, all they're doing is that they're doing some smearing of Hexet, but it's not going to affect anything because we know that the Democrat Tim Kaine obviously is going to vote against Hexet. So what is the point of this? What's the point of his bringing up his Hexet's somewhat sordid personal life? And and I think we talked about this, I don't know, I guess a couple of months ago when his name was first raised. I mean, when Trump nominated him, I mean, he obviously has no real judgment in these matters. I mean, you go to a public event where you're the speaker, and then you in front of everybody make a move, or she makes a move on you, a woman, and she's a married woman, and not only is she a married woman, her husband is at the conference, and so that already shows a lack of judgment. Then, of course, worst of all, and entirely predictably, she, he had double bad judgment because she immediately turned around and said, "Oh, he had assaulted me. It was a rape," and so it really shows a lack of judgment. And I'm not to say the least, I'm not a fan of Hexeth at all. As I say, I think these kinds of activities show a lack of judgment, a lack of serious lack of judgment, and then his Zionism is just deeply distasteful. So I don't think it was a great choice. But oddly enough, the Democrats are picking on him on issues that I think is really not that contentious, which is women not being in combat roles, because I don't think women should be in combat roles. I think it's a ridiculous kind of egalitarianism. Well, if men are doing it, then women should be doing it. It's a stupid argument. I mean, you can absolutely say that you know women have no business being in combat roles. I mean, they have lots of other roles that they can play in the military. Um, you know, we don't even have to enumerate them. All sorts of logistical roles and informational roles, and administrative. I mean, plenty of things, but not in combat. I mean, and for the same reason, you can say, well, I don't think um, men over the age of whatever, 40 should be in combat roles. I don't think men above a certain weight should be in combat roles. I mean, and men, men below a certain height should not be in a combat roles. You're going to say all sorts of reasons why I don't think, um, women have no business being in in combat roles, and particularly, the issue with women, isn't just a question of physical strength, physical dexterity, but it's also that how men respond when when they see women in danger, women getting shot at, and they immediately leap in to assist. And that, of course, harms entirely combat effectiveness. And no one really ever addresses that. Well, yeah, fine. Well, let's have women in combat roles, but does this enhance combat effectiveness, or is it going to lead to something completely chaotic, in which the fighting capability of a unit is drastically reduced. And so that was always the issue why women should not have been in combat. But for saying that, because he gets attacked, and then he kind of has beaten the retreat. He hasn't quite completely abandoned the view. But he's saying, well, yeah, I think women should be in combat as long as standards are not reduced. But of course, standards are reduced. I mean, it's right. So that was when he was, what he was saying was perfectly right, and I think that was, it wasn't at all unreasonable to insist on that, and he should have continued with it. He should have, at the hearing, he should have said, "Yeah, I still think that." And but if the president wants to maintain that women should be in combat roles, and I will carry out the president's wishes. But my own personal view is that they have no business being in combat roles. I think that is reducing the combat effectiveness of the U.S. military. So he can say that. But you have to do the confirmation conversion. That's a familiar routine. Um, and so now I've just got Esse Delendam says, when it's an Amazonian woman, the instinct to save the ordinary damsel in distress isn't going to be active. Yeah, except that they're not really Amazonian women. I mean, it's just they're often they're in the military for a variety of reasons, but when some you look at these female soldiers, and they kind of look quite petite. They just don't look very very formidable, and I think that's really is it's an obvious issue. Just as we talked before about, it's not a great idea to have what's going on here. The women police officers, because when they have to confront violent criminals, violent criminals saying, "Hey, I can take her," and so, well, I'm going to I'm going to put these handcuffs on you. Well, before she puts her handcuffs on the violent suspect, he just sort of basically knocks her out with one punch. I mean, it's unfortunate, but That's the reality. But now we have to we go through this routine, both in Britain and in the United States, whereby every police commissioner, just about everywhere, police commissioner in this city, in that city, everywhere, it's always a woman. And as I said before, the reason is that that's how you stave off any criticism. Hey, this is our police commissioner. Well, don't attack us for incompetence or complete uselessness. Our police commissioner is this woman. And so that's it's now that it's de rigueur. How do you save yourself from media attacks? Well, you bring, hey, I got, this is our police commissioner. So, and you got the police commissioner in New Orleans who looked like a granny, and say, well, we're doing a good job. We're maintaining diversity, inclusiveness, and all the rest. Um, that's that. So the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is yesterday. The screening we had was Breaker Morant, and anyway, who hasn't seen it should absolutely go to the locals page and watch Breaker Morant. So especially, it should be a good incentive for anyone to join the Gaggles, our locals page, and then you can watch it. And of course, you have to absolutely essential is to read the notes, the very detailed and fascinating notes that Cynthia has provided. There's a great deal to be learned, and so it's the Break of Morant, that was a real event, and a quite significant event, and so all of that information that Cynthia's provided is essential reading. So watch the film and read Cynthia's notes. Either read the notes before we watch the film, or watch the film and then read the notes, or do it at the same time. But absolutely essential. But anyway, what was interesting about the film is, as you know, the story is that these Australians, were basically fighting on behalf of the British in the Boer War, and then the Boer War was really between the British, trying to bring the South Africa under the control of the British Empire, and the Boer resistance, or the Boers were basically didn't want to subordinate themselves to the British, and their base was in Transvaal and the Orange Free State. They trekked inland, and they didn't want to bring themselves, to subordinate themselves to the British. But of course, the problem that the Boers had was, they discovered gold. There was a lot of gold underground. I mean, they also found there was diamonds as well, but the gold was the key. And of course, where there's gold, the British will say, "Well, we want a piece of this gold," and of course, that was really the origin of this conflict. But what happened was that the Boers fought with great tenacity. This is, after all, really, this is the British Empire, the mightiest empire in the world, and it was expected that they would win this war and bring the Boers to heel very quickly. Because they're just a bunch of farmers, whereas this is the British Empire. But these Boer farmers, were really very skillful at fighting back against the British, and they were very innovative with guerrilla warfare. Now, as we know from other parts of the world where they practice guerrilla warfare, it's actually quite difficult to fight guerrillas, particularly if they're fighting very skillfully. And the British were having real difficulties fighting against these the Boer guerrillas. They essentially, they were blowing up trains. They were, stealthily attacking British positions, and they did what guerrillas do, which is they wore civilian uniforms. So it was not always easy to identify, who were combatants and who weren't. And the British then realized that to win this war, they would have to really wage an extraordinarily savage campaign against the Boers. Just fighting it in the normal way, using infantry wasn't going to be any good. I mean, the Boers were just very clever in fighting a guerrilla war. So they had to do the kinds of things that other countries subsequently did in order to crush guerrilla war, partisan war, which is you take it out on the civilian population. You threaten and terrorize the civilian population into abandoning support for the guerrillas. And that's what the British did. And, so they created these, the concentration camps. So that was pretty much the first time, that you had these concentration camps. I mean, the Spanish did a little bit of that in Cuba, but this was quite serious concentration camps where they put in, women, children, civilians. I mean, that was the whole point, to try to rob the Boers of their support. And they also carried out terrorist attacks, punishing the civilian population. So in other words, that's your punishment for supporting the Boer guerrillas. Now, the thing then was with with this break of Morant is that they executed prisoners of war. Now, that's a kind of a sore point, because prisoners of war, this was the first time that the codes of war were being articulated. So we had the Hague Conventions and we had the Geneva Conventions, and the key thing about when you formulate these laws of war is that you have to protect civilians. And so you basically say, well, we're going to outlaw certain kinds of things. We're going to outlaw, attacks on civilian conurbations, any kind of missile attacks on cities. We're going to outlaw that. But the crucial one was, they say, well, we're going to outlaw executions of prisoners of war. I mean, if people have surrendered, you can't very well shoot them. But the problem here was that the Boers, and these, as I say, they were fighting a guerrilla war, that the Boers were not really fighting in the normal kind of combat. As we've seen this many times over. They weren't wearing uniforms, so it's not like, well, they're wearing a uniform. So since they weren't lawful combatants, then essentially you can say, well, they're just terrorists. They're not wearing a uniform. They're just civilians who picked up guns, and that therefore they're just carrying out terror. And since they're terrorists, we don't have to spare their lives just because we've captured them. And so they say, well, the laws of war don't apply to people who are not regular combatants. So there were, there's no question, the British did practice executions of prisoners of war, and they argued, hey, well, just they're not lawful combatants. We impose martial law. Anyone who's violating martial law gets shot. And so the story was about Breaker Morant and a couple of his his junior officers did execute Boers. They weren't even prisoners of war; they just simply executed them, as well as a German missionary. And so the Essed says partisan fighters. Yeah, the partisan fighters. That's exactly it, and that's exactly what the Germans subsequently did, which is when you punish the civilian population, and you say, hey, for every German that's killed by a partisan, we're going to kill 100 civilians. It's very brutal, but it's kind of thing that the British did in that war. I mean, because again, this was a new kind of war, which the British just simply hadn't figured out how to fight. It took them a long time. That's why this war went on for 3 years, and no one expected that. Again, on the one hand, you've got these farmers, the Boers, and then on the other side, you've got this formidable military, which supposedly the strongest in the world. This is the British Empire. But the British decided to make a lesson, to show their humanity, and particularly that the British were concerned that the Germans would get involved in this in the Boer War. I mean, the German sympathy was with the Boers, and so the British wanted to set an example by putting on trial, Morant and a couple of his junior officers. And of course, it was obviously a sham court-martial, and then they were executed. Now, the problem is with the subsequent discussion about it, particularly among the Australians, and Morant was actually British. He had just spent time in Australia, but he he volunteered for Australian fighting services, and then he was sent. Once he was volunteered for the Australians, the Australians who wanted to help the British Empire. They wanted to show themselves that they are not just colonials, but they were there fighting alongside the British. So the Australians sort of made him into a kind of a hero, who was terribly treated by the British. The problem, I mean, in one sense, he was badly treated in that there was a certain measure of hypocrisy in what the British were doing, because this was really a very, very nasty war, and the British were fighting very, very nastily, as were the Boers. I mean, this was a guerrilla war, and the British were kind of learning how to fight a guerrilla war on the job. Initially, they didn't know how to fight this war, but gradually they learned, and they learned doing it, in a very savage way. Basically, setting up concentration camps, and so the execution, after a kind of a fake court-martial. I mean, obviously, it was a ridiculous court-martial. It's not very good, because they said, well, they picked on him because it was easy. You just you grab a few Australians, make an example of them, and then you let everyone else go. And you saw this in the film, while some of the British officers, who were just as culpable as Morant in the executions of prisoners of war, they didn't face any kind of punishment. However, that doesn't make Morant in any way a hero. He's certainly not a heroic figure. So you know he unleashed savagery against the Boers, out of rage over the killing of his senior officer, who was a personal friend of his. So that's never, that's never good. And again, I mean, he made it a habit of killing, of killing unarmed men, and carrying out executions. Um, and again, the practice of putting prisoners of war in in train carriages, because the Boers again were very clever. They were blowing up trains because they knew that this is the key to British power, that they had a transport infrastructure. They had the trains, they controlled the trains, and therefore they could move men and logistics very easily, something the Boer farmers couldn't do. So naturally, the Boers started, blowing up trains. And so, what did Morant do? Well, I mean, they put these prisoners, the Boer prisoners, they put them on these the trains. So hey, well, you want to be blown up? Yeah, fine. Well, you would just blow you up. So that was the film. Now, the question then is, I think Cynthia raised this issue, was that in the film, anyone who's watched the film, so this is for people who are familiar with the details of the film, but that in the film there is a scene in which all the officers who are involved in the court martial, not obviously the defendants, but the prosecutor, the presiding judges, and the defense attorney, they're having dinner. The British do these kinds of things. They have very very nice dinner and always very polite. But at the dinner table was a Boer woman, a rather attractive Boer woman, and then subsequently there is an attack on the this military headquarters where the court martial is taking place. An attack launched by the Boers. And so the question is, well, what, and in this attack, the Boer woman joins in. She joins in and essentially takes part in this attack against the people that she was happily dining with, the night before, or a couple of nights before. Now, so the question is then, well, what is the purpose? I mean, of this? Was she really working with the British? Was this just an attempt to essentially sabotage the court martial? Whose side was she on, and so on? But the thing about this scene, which is a kind of powerful scene in this, that it's entirely fictional. I mean, that there's no evidence that there was any kind of a Boer attack on the army headquarters during the trial. And so this was a fictional, and therefore, what Beresford was trying to do, first of all, that the Boers were quite treacherous, and again, there's no you can't attack them for that. This woman was quite treacherous. She was making nice with the British officers, But when the time came, her true loyalty was with the Boers, and she took part in this attack against the people that she'd been happily dining with. And you know, this again, this was a quite nasty war. And throughout the films, you see some Boers who were working for the British, but their real loyalty was to the cause of the Boers. Um, so really, you know, I think the reason this was introduced into the film, as I say, this was not a historical event. It was introduced into the film was, I think, to show the kind of war that this was. You know, that really, you really don't know who's on whose side. You know, you could, you know, think, hey, well, we're really friendly, but really, they were just being deceitful. You basically have spies in the headquarters, and you know, treacherous terrorists in the headquarters. And the moment they get the opportunity, they turn with their guns and their dynamite against their supposed friends. So I think that was the reason. And of course, the other reason why this was introduced into the film was that during this attack, Morant and his junior officers, uh, you know, they conducted themselves with aplomb and saved the very officers who were trying them, you know, who were holding a court martial against them. So the fact that, you know, they behaved with great heroism to save the lives of the people who were trying them, judging them, and ultimately sentencing them to death. And so here was this moment when, hey, they saved the lives of the judges, the prosecutors, all the people who want to put them to death. And instead of an act of generosity, saying, you know what, you saved our lives, you know, you conducted yourself with great heroism. Let's cancel this trial. Let's just forget it, or you walk away with a reprimand or a dishonorable discharge, and then we'll just call it a day. But no, 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 no. Have to go through the trial. You have to go through all, nothing must stand in the way of the trial. So despite the fact that they saved the lives of the judges, the trial went through, and of course they came in with their verdict and sentence, and the sentence was immediately carried out. No real opportunities for appeal. So that was the what I wanted to raise. But I want to go back to let's think of some. We have some questions about. Let's see about the film. And so let me see. Okay, well, okay. First of all, we got Danaki. Always good to see you, Danaki. And so I'm looking at our Gaggle locals page. So Danaki says, besides Fetterman being a fascinating man, what can we expect from the man of peace in the new golden age? Oh, I know, Ukraine, lower the conscription age to 18 to stave off the Russians. Mike Waltz, MAGA fuck yeah, peace deal on day one. Well, as I say, as we were talking earlier about the situation in the Middle East. I mean, if this happens, and if the stories are indeed true, that this deal came about because Trump applied pressure against Netanyahu, well, that's definitely a positive for Trump. But we'll see. I mean, again, we've been here before. We had all the excitement about a possible ceasefire, and then of course nothing happens. So we'll see where it goes from here. Now, as to Ukraine, it is very interesting that that Mike Waltz came along and said, "Oh, I think the the conscription age should be reduced to 18." That's been the position of the Biden administration. It's also been the position of people such as Lindsey Graham and the familiar war hawks. Of course, have never seen a day in a day in combat in their lives. So that, I mean, it's a very troubling thing for Waltz to say, because of course, if the Trump team really wants to bring this war to a swift conclusion, then you try to bring it to a swift conclusion, which means the line is, hey, we're bringing it to an end. So don't anybody do anything excessive. Just tone everything down. Don't rush off and conduct any military operations. Just everybody just back down. Because we're going to be having meetings soon. We're going to have negotiations soon. We're going to try and bring this thing to an end soon. So no need for any drastic actions. Least of all, something that's going to be extremely problematic, such as by reducing the age of 18, because his idea, Waltz's idea, was that well, we need to stabilize the front, and the way we stabilize the front is by shoveling a lot more Ukrainian men to the front. Now, one thing that is very important is that in a way he's quite right, and that's why all the talk that we've heard for months and months, if not years, oh, Ukraine doesn't have any manpower. Ukraine just doesn't. That's it. Ukraine has run out of men. There's just no more men. That's it. There's nothing. The cupboard is bare. There aren't any men you can send to the front. But of course, there are men you can send to the front. I'm not saying that they should be. Obviously, they shouldn't be sent to the front. I mean, that's obviously absolutely catastrophic. The whole war is catastrophic. It's catastrophic that you're going to decimate your country's men, especially your young men. But but the manpower is there, and therefore the point that they're going to run out of men this time next week has always been based on a lie. I mean, yes, they have men. I mean, they reduced the call-up age. I think it was 28, and they reduced it to 26, and now he's saying they should reduce it to 18. So there is manpower to be had. So again, that's just based on nonsense that they didn't have the manpower. Now, the question is, how will the Ukrainians react? And to reducing it to 18. I mean, I think they're not going to react well. And maybe if we're thinking in terms of this 5D chess, that's what it's really all about. That if the Americans demand you got to lower your conscription age to 18, and then Zelensky says, well, I can't do that because people are going to hang me on the lamppost. They're not going to send their children to the front to get slaughtered. And then you say, well, if you're not really willing to do the sacrifices, well, then sorry, we're pulling the plug. I mean, there may be something like that, but I wouldn't bet on it, because I think that, again, if your goal is to bring this war to a conclusion, and that's what we've been told. We've been told, for years, that Trump wants to end this war, and the way he's going to end this war is he's going to kick Ukraine under the bus. He's going to pull the plug. He's going to say, "That's it, no more. We're not interested in this war. This is Biden's war." And besides, we want good relations with Russia because we need Russia against China and all the rest. But if that's what your objective is, then that you don't do what Mike Waltz said, because at this stage you say, hey, well, we're going to be taking over in 7 days' time, and essentially we're going to be saying everything, calm down, everything, just let's back off on everybody. Let's just stop with these dangerous exploits. That's it. I mean, it's like the way they did it in Vietnam. Preliminary. Before as a preliminary to the final withdrawal. The United States was saying, well, no more of these dangerous missions, no more of these casualty-prone missions. We don't want to lose any more lives, and that's why. So they said, okay, like Hamburger Hill, no more Hamburger Hills. No, we're not going to undertake any kinds of missions where there's likely to be heavy casualties. And that's when you that's the order you give when you know that this is the beginning of the end, that we're gradually unwinding this war. So when Waltz says, hey, we need to lower the age of conscription to 18, that doesn't sound like you're unwinding the war. That sounds you want to escalate. And when he says we got to stabilize the front, then essentially his idea of stabilizing the front is to send a hell of a lot more Ukrainians to the front to get slaughtered. That's not what we've been expected from Trump. Now, that's the position. Now, one should say, though, in that same interview, Waltz, did say that you have to drop the absolutist demands, which is that every square inch of Ukrainian territory has to be freed of Russians. So that's on the other side. You say, okay, well, he did say that. So there's something for everyone in that interview. But his thing about the conscription being lowered, and then you have this Mark Rutte, the new NATO Secretary General, who I think yesterday he was speaking before the European Union and complaining about how much Europeans spend on welfare, and then he's saying, "Hey, we just want something comparable to to spending on your military." So say, "Hey, we spend 25% of our income on welfare. We're not asking for 25% on the military, but just a small portion of that." So that's Mark Rutte, and of course he again mouthed the familiar platitude that somehow we gotta before we get to the negotiating table, we need to strengthen Ukraine, because Ukraine at the moment is in no condition to negotiate. We can't negotiate now. Ukraine's not in a position to negotiate. Therefore, we've got to get everything, all our arms, everything to Ukraine, and like yesterday. No, that's what he said. That's kind of literally what he said. So again, that's the talk coming from NATO. Admittedly, that's not Trump's talk, but it's a measure of just how wedded the Western political establishment is to continuing this war in Ukraine. And even today, among these Democrats, they're constantly badgering Hegseth about, hey, don't you want Ukraine to win? You're not going to abandon Ukraine, are you? So, we'll have to see. I'm been skeptical from the start that Trump is really going to do this, just abandon Ukraine. I mean, I think much more likely is Trump's idea of to escalate to de-escalate. Completely nonsensical, but I think that you would think that, well, I'm going to do a lot more in order to apply pressure against Russia. I don't think it's just that applying pressure against Ukraine. There's no market for it among his side. Yeah, among Bannon and the sort of these hardcore MAGA, there's a market for it, but they're not the majority among the Republicans. They're certainly not a majority on Capitol Hill. So I, you know, I have my doubts that's going to happen. Richard Phillips, nice to see you. Anyway, Cynthia was talking about again the with about the breaker Morant, and so Cynthia says one reason why the court martial was such a mockery of itself is because Morant and Hancock was one of Morant's junior officers, were acquitted of killing a German reverend when the primary purpose for prosecuting them, with the ultimate aim of convicting them of that crime, was so the Germans wouldn't enter the war on the side of the Boers against the British. Yeah, that's right. But since they instead were found guilty of killing Boer prisoners, the British likely did so to make nice with the Boers or a way to reach a peace deal with the Boers. Yeah, I think that's so. I think that's right. I think that you're absolutely right. That was the pretext that somehow we want to avoid the Germans getting involved in the Boer War on the side of the Boers, and so we want to make an example that we put them on trial for having killed this German missionary. But as Cynthia points out, they were acquitted of the crime of killing the German missionary, but they were convicted of killing the Boers. You're absolutely right. I mean, it was an attempt to, come to some kind of an accommodation with the Boers. The British kind of learned their lesson from this. The Boers turned out to be a very formidable fighting force. Again, it took the British 3 years finally to prevail against a supposedly much weaker and much inferior force. And as a result of that, essentially, they kind of created this Union of South Africa, which was, in other words, the Boers actually achieved what they wanted. I mean, they wanted autonomy from the British, and that's what they got with the creation of the Union of South Africa. So although the British won the war at a huge cost, huge cost in casualties and financially, it was a massive drain on the British exchequer. So the British won that, but the end result was that they created the Union of South Africa. It was the Boers who actually accomplished their wartime goals, which is they wanted their autonomy within the British Empire. The funny thing is that, of course, subsequently, I mean, the cause of the Boers was a great liberal cause in Great Britain, because they were seen to be bullied. Here were these independent people. I mean, they were the ones who were there. I mean, they've been there for centuries, and they they got lucky. They got gold there. They started making money from the gold. And of course, it was because of the discovery of gold in Transvaal that, of course, thus began the massive African migration into South Africa, because hey, there were jobs there, and this was this massive, huge, throughout the entire continent. Everyone was coming to South Africa, and naturally, I mean, there weren't that many Boers. The Boers wanted to maintain their identity, and so thus began the sort of the long process towards creating apartheid. They wanted to keep themselves separate from others, otherwise they'd just be overwhelmed by this mass of African labor. Um, but anyway, that really no one cared about that at the time. They always thought that, hey, the Boers were these independent European people, and they were being bullied by the British. And so it was a real liberal cause. Churchill, he was a liberal. He sided with the Boers, and Lloyd George, the political weighty political figures in Britain said that the cause of the Boers was a just cause. And so again, that is one of the reasons why essentially the Boers won everything they wanted as a result of that war. But I think it's sort of, when you think back upon it now, what's striking about it is that the Boers were supposed to be the sort of these liberal heroes, and then within a generation they became a really reviled, hated group of people because they became the Afrikaners, the people who created the apartheid South Africa, and then apartheid became for decades this kind of liberal cause célèbre. So the most vile, horrible institution known to man was introduced into South Africa. Even though you'd have to say that almost any white group who dominated in South Africa would have wanted to find some means of essentially defending themselves against this demographic avalanche of Africans who were pouring into South Africa, because that's where jobs were. That's where the money was. And of course, the English who were living in South Africa, they didn't have any problem with apartheid. I mean, they didn't like the Afrikaners very much, but they didn't have a problem with apartheid. But yeah, Cynthia, you're absolutely right. They just wanted to make nice with the Boers, and they sort of say, hey, look, look how reasonable we are. And they picked on these. They picked on the Australians. They were an easy, juicy target. They weren't going to, execute British officers. They, executed some Australians. Who cares about Australians? It's just a colonial backwater. And so it was, and so yeah, it was there was no, it was an injustice. But as a war, yeah, it's a war crime. Of course, it's a war crime if you kill people who are unarmed. But but they, the British justified it, say, well, yeah, but they're not fighting as a legal armed formation. I mean, you can, the laws of war only applies if you're wearing a uniform, if you're a legal armed formation. Yeah, then you don't execute prisoners of war. But if they're not, if they're just simply carrying guns and killing, they're just farmers who are just killing people, then yeah, the laws of war don't apply, and therefore you can't just simply shoot them summarily. So that was that was the argument. But they decided they would make a lesson of Morant. Anyway, Cynthia goes on and says the trial was also rigged because Captain Taylor did testify, one, that there were orders from Pretoria to kill prisoners. I don't agree with you there, Cynthia, because I think that Taylor didn't say that there were orders. What Taylor said was that there was an understanding that prisoners would be shot. So he never heard or actually anyone saying that this is the order from Kitchener's headquarters, that the prisoners are to be shot. He's saying that there was an understanding Um, and there were no such orders. I mean, the fact is there were no such orders, and no one has ever been able to um, come up with any orders issued by British High Command to shoot prisoners. But the understanding, I mean, I think it is an understanding. They say, hey, well, this is a new kind of war. We're fighting a guerrilla war. These are people who are not um, professional soldiers. They're essentially guerrillas, partisans, or commanders, all the terms that we eventually become used to, and the laws of war don't apply to them. So you can absolutely shoot them um, in accordance with the practice. You can say, hey, they're terrorists, and therefore you can just shoot them on sight. And of course, well, the British impose martial law, and they say, well, this is in violation of martial law. You just shoot them on sight. So this was just simply the way that was the understanding, but there was no written order saying, hey, you ought to shoot prisoners. Um, and above all, I mean, you don't shoot anyone who is wearing a uniform, anyone who's fighting as a regular soldier. Anyway, then so what Taylor testified was that was the understanding, even though he never heard or saw any written order that they were to shoot prisoners. And then two, he knew that Captain Hunt received these orders. Well, we don't know. Again, we don't really know. Remember, in the film, Captain Hunt is saying, well, that's what he had heard. He had had a conversation with Colonel, I forgot his name, but who was on Kitchener's staff, and he had told him we went to take prisoners. But that was his story. That was the story of Captain Hunt. That was his claim. And you could certainly say, well, I got these orders from Captain Hunt. But again, we don't know whether that's in fact correct, whether Hunt in fact did receive these orders, or whether he just simply made them up. Hunt was already dead by then, so there was therefore, it's quite pointless bringing him in and saying, well, oh, he told us that he had had a conversation with somebody else, a colonel from Kitchener's staff, and said, well, we can shoot prisoners. But in fact, again, no one ever saw these orders that prisoners were to be shot. And no one has ever no one has ever found any document, any order to shoot prisoners. And then three, he knew of some prisoners who were also killed by other British soldiers. Oh, that I agree with. Yeah, that there's no question about that. There were execution, and I agree that this was unfair, that they picked on these guys, but not on British soldiers. And after all, Taylor, nothing at all happened to Taylor. He obviously did take part in the shootings of prisoners, but he was never put on trial. There's no question. However, one has to say, again, however much of a mockery that court-martial was, however one say, it's not a defense. Sadly, it's not a defense to say that somebody else did it. The tu quoque defense it's not legally valid to say, oh well, yeah, but you're picking on me, but what about so and so? He also committed these crimes. Yeah, but they're not on trial, so that's not it's never been a valid defense that somebody else is doing it. So, but it is true that there was something deeply dishonest about this whole exercise, and that they were holding this court-martial for a political purpose. It wasn't really about justice, but it was a political purpose. But all of his testimony was dismissed, yeah, which means the court was dead set on finding the three carbineers guilty. that was the name of their unit, guilty, even if they weren't guilty. Well, they were guilty. No, I think that's a part of it. They were determined to find them guilty, but they were guilty. Again, there was no question that they killed unarmed men, and they did it they did it a number of times. It was they killed quite a number of unarmed men. They did it without any formal orders to kill them. They just said, "Hey, there was an understanding that we would kill prisoners," and then so there's no question that they were the guilty party. The question is, well, was it fair to hold a court martial to single these people out, who happily were Australians and therefore they were an easy target, while no one else was put on trial? Well, yeah, I mean that part of it is unfair, and the way that the court martial was conducted was unfair, but they were guilty. I mean, I think that's the point. I mean, you have to say they were guilty, and Breaker Morant is not he's not a hero. I mean, he did commit crimes. I mean, he shot unarmed men, and he didn't do it in self-defense. And there was really no justification for his killings. He just hated the Boers. He was very upset about what happened to his friend, his Captain Hunt. But yeah, I mean, but he committed the crime. I mean, I don't think he should have been put on trial. I don't think he should have been executed. But that doesn't make him innocent. Anyway, that was done to protect the higher ups in Pretoria. Well, we really don't know. Again, no, there were no orders given to shoot prisoners. I mean, it was just a practice that they had engaged in. That it was there. They were doing these things, but there's no evidence that anyone in Pretoria from Kitchener's command had given orders to execute prisoners. This was, that these officers had sort of, it was, they wanted to do it. They were very happy. This was a nasty war. They were very happy to execute prisoners, but they had no basis for thinking that this was in accord with orders from Kitchener. Anyway, Cynthia goes on. The trial was also a sham because those who were to testify in the Carbineers' favor were all sent to India to keep them from testifying. I don't know about that. I mean, there's a limit to what kind of a case. You don't really have a defense. I mean, your only defense here would be, well, you've killed, basically you've killed in cold blood, unarmed men. Okay, so what, they didn't deny that they'd killed in cold blood unarmed men. They claimed that there was an order to execute prisoners, not to take any prisoners, but to execute them. Okay. Where's that order? Who issued you with that order? And they can't really present it. And again, to this day, there's no one has produced that order to execute prisoners. Now, it was done. There was no question that this was a practice that was carried out by the British in the Boer War. There's no question. They, Morant and the others were not the only ones who did it. But that's not a defense. It's not a defense to say, well, other people were doing it. It's unfair to single these people out. That is fine. It's certainly unfair, but that's not really a legal argument. That that somehow, oh well, but other people were doing it. Why are you picking on me? That's just not a it's never been accepted. The tu quoque defense. Somebody else is doing it. The tu quoque defense is just simply not legally valid. I mean, politically, it's a politically valid argument, but legally, it's not a valid argument. Just to say, hey, I'm not the only one who committed a crime. So, if so, then also then when the Boers attacked the military camp, if it weren't all 3 jailed carbineers who fought off the Boers, everyone at the camp, including the court officers, would have been killed. Yeah, I agree. So, if anything, their sentences ought to have been commuted under a precedent by the Duke of Wellington stating the prisoners who redeemed themselves in combat should be pardoned. All of that is correct, but as I say, that was a fictional addition to the film. It's not. There's no evidence that this happened. So that I think they introduced it into the film precisely for that purpose. Hey, these were heroic figures, which they were. I mean, just because they committed crimes, that doesn't mean that they weren't heroic, that they weren't brave, or that they weren't decent men in all sorts of other ways. But that's not based on any a real event that there was this attack on the headquarters during the court martial, and they distinguished themselves for their bravery. So I think that was just a fictional addition to the film, very effective, but it's not part of the record. So, and then Cynthia says, with all that in mind, George, explain to me why there's nothing wrong with the British Royal to have hosted with a breaker Morant back in 1980 without expressing so much as an ounce of shame, guilt, or regret for this gross miscarriage of justice in the hands of the Brits against the Aussies. To me, they're cold-hearted, self-centered, and self-absorbed. Either that, or they don't have a clue about the backstory and background of the trial, let alone the trial itself. Well, chances are they probably don't know much about it. But look, history is what it is. I mean, you can say, that, hey, look, I didn't do it. This is, that as the royals, as the people, somehow the head of state, we have to accept that many people did many bad things in the past to make Britain great. I mean, it became a great Britain. It became a great empire. It conquered at one time. It ruled over, I don't know, half the world. Well, chances are a lot of bad things were done in order to get there. You don't get to rule over India, rule over much of Africa by being very nice and very polite and adhering to law and so on. So they can say, okay, well, we have to look at our history and look and say, yeah, a lot of nasty things happen. So I think there's nothing unusual about that. They would say, yeah, that we we did a lot of bad things in the Boer War, particularly the Boer War, which, as I say, even liberal opinion at the time had really turned against what the British were doing in South Africa. They thought the cause of the Boers was a just cause, so there'd be nothing wrong with that. So, well, yeah, that was we have adopt this liberal cause, which is the of the Boers. Now, again, by 1980, I don't know whether anyone really thought that the cause of the Boers was really a noble one. They thought, hey, these are the Afrikaners. These are the people who massacred blacks, by the hundreds, by the thousands in Sharpeville, and of course this was already just a few years after Soweto. So suddenly the Boers weren't looking so great. Um, and so that's it. But the other thing is that even as I say, it just goes back to the question that um, Morant and the others, they 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 weren't admirable figures. I mean, they were criminals. I mean, you could say, war is hell, and people do very, very nasty things in war. But nonetheless, they committed murder, and they were executed unfairly, unjustly, maybe. I think that's unfair. Um, but it's not really a great cause to gnash your teeth over, because these are people who just killed unarmed men, and there was no need for it. They just killed them, and there was, but I don't know. I mean, this was a royal event, and the film was done with a familiar kind of liberal political slant, which was, hey, the British Empire was not a particularly great thing. Oddly enough, because we also had Gallipoli screened here at the Gaggle a few weeks ago. Um, I think Gallipoli is the British come out much worse in Gallipoli than they do in Breaker Morant, because and again, Gallipoli was made by Peter Weir, another Australian. So Beresford made Breaker Morant, Weir did Gallipoli, and I think Gallipoli came out about a year after Breaker Morant. But I think the British are much darker and much more sinister in Gallipoli than they are in Breaker Morant, because after all, in Breaker Morant, they are actually trying criminals. I mean, they are actually trying a crime, because we can talk of, I agree about the hypocrisy and everything else, but they are actually trying a crime. I mean, the people who were on trial and eventually executed did commit crimes. I mean, they did murder in cold blood a number of people. Gallipoli, however, there they were just simply being sacrificed. They were just throwing, that's or at least that's the way the film portrays it. They were just being thrown into into the path of machine guns. I mean, it was just and therefore, really, this is what they were using the Australians for. Just simply cannon fodder. So that was, I think, the British come out much worse there than they do in Breaker Morant. So I don't know that the Royals were particularly upset by this. So, um, and then where are we? Let me go back. Um, and Marty, always good to see you. Thank you very much, Marty, for your generosity. Anne Marie, always good to see you. Thank you for your generosity. I don't know whether, Anne Marie, you've yet weighed in on the Shostakovich piece that we had on at the Gaggle Music Club. It's not a one of these. Not a weighty piece of music. We're used to listening to these very long, serious pieces of work by Shostakovich, the Leningrad Symphony, Babi Yar, and so on. This was a kind of very light Shostakovich, and I'm kind of curious, Anne-Marie, if you listen to it, as to what you thought of it. But Denaki says, for Britain, the Second Boer War was the longest and most expensive. 211 million pounds. 19.9 billion at 2022 prices. That's a lot. I mean, by US standards, 20 billion, who cares about that? You've given a lot more to Ukraine. But by British standards, that's a lot. That's a lot of money. And the bloodiest conflict between 1815 and 1914. Was it? I guess it was probably the bloodiest. I mean, there were a number of wars. But in terms of the great powers, and they probably weren't. Yeah, because the Franco-Prussian War wasn't quite that bloody. Yeah, yeah. It was a very Yeah, lasting 3 months longer and resulting in more British combat casualties than the Crimean War. Um, hmm, Disease took a greater toll in the Crimean War, claiming 17,580 British. Yeah, no, I think that's right. That's right. It was uh, it was just stunning in its in its destructiveness because again, uh, you know, obviously relations had been quite tense between the British and the Boers, and the British obviously thought that they would bring the Boers to heel quite easily. They didn't think that this would turn out to be such a such a savage war. I mean, as often happens, the British had the technological advances. The railways. They had the Maxim machine gun. Um, but the Boers, they kind of, they fought this guerrilla war with such skill, and the British really, for quite some time, they had no idea how to do it, how to fight that, and so they were losing enormous numbers of lives until they gradually figured out the kind of tactics that eventually others pursued. The Germans pursued, which the Americans in Vietnam, the British in Malaysia. How to cut the guerrillas off from the civilian population, and the savage reprisals and so on. But it took some time for the British to figure out how to fight the Boers. So Danak says 22,000 soldiers killed, 74,000 wounded and diseased, only 6,000 Boers killed, but the 26,000 died in concentration camps. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, in the end, the Boers, achieved what they wanted. It was, so it was, militarily the British won, but politically, it was a victory for the Boers. Let's see if there's anything on our YouTube. Yeah, again, let's see. Let's see. Yeah, so see if there's some. Yes, okay, so let's. S.A. Dillendam says, George, do you think Likud is a force like the Nazi party in the sense of being a special part of Israeli politics that can go away? Or is it like part of the whole of Israel's game as the bad cop? No, I think the Likud is, very, very much like in its nationalism, extreme nationalism, its extreme fanaticism, racism, and hatred for for the other. It is like the Nazis, but it's an integral part of Israeli politics and has been ever since was it 1977 when Menachem Begin became prime minister. So in its early days, Israel had cultivated this liberal kind of fake, obviously a fake public image. That, oh well, it's all these kibbutz, this lovely socialist community, and then you had labor that ruled over Israel, at least for the first generation. They're all kind of, they all had sort of supposedly leftish views, but it was obviously it was fake. But after 77, really, Likud was just now an integral part of Israeli politics and society, and that goes with the territory of that kind of um, racism and a ruthless imperialism of subjugating its anyone who stands in its way. and I don't see any prospect of Likud disappearing. I mean, I'm not even sure Netanyahu, even if there's a ceasefire and we start moving seriously towards a long-term peace deal. I don't think this is the end for Netanyahu. I think he's just so he's such a dominant figure in Israeli politics, and I think I mean, obviously there are people who hate him, but I don't see anyone who's a more a serious challenger to him. So I would expect, and even if Netanyahu disappears for a year or two, I can see him coming back. It's he's disappeared before, and he's always managed to come back. Um, the talk watcher says Hexeth is the man who wears his religion on his sleeve, but he's not a good Christian, is he? No, I don't think he is. Okay. Essay Dylan Dunn says it's not totally stupid because some women are genuinely masculine and suited for war. Amazonian feminism. Yeah, I don't know about that. It's more like the stuff of comic strips. Um, I mean, for war. I mean, I'm not saying women are gentle and sweet or anything like that. I don't. That part I don't believe. And women can can be cruel and vicious and bloodthirsty and all of the rest. There's no question about that. My question, what I have doubts about, is for the kind of physical strength and physical endurance that is required for war, not the ability to inflict great pain on an adversary. I'm sure women can do that as effectively as men. Um, hmm. So Just a Maverick says the Boers had money, the very best rifles, and they were great trackers and hunters. Yeah, they were that, and they were also very good marksmen. Which I think one of the reasons why the British suffered such casualties, because they were such good marksmen. They knew how to shoot. Um, and hmm. So it was J1. I can't read it. J1 AI1 C1 K1. It's very hard. I may not made a. Can I sleep on your couch, George? Very very nice offer, but I think it's going to be difficult. You've got to, it's going to be coming to Hungary. I mean, that's a big big ordeal. Hey, a staffer says, "Hey George, were the Hungarian terrorists in 1956? Riddle me that." Um, well, I don't think so. I think in that case, you'd have to say um, that that it was I mean, no, I think you'd have to say that it would be free to it would be reasonable to call them freedom fighters. I think that the claim of Soviet occupation would have been, they would have made a reasonable claim. Now, they could have argued, the, the Soviet authorities would have argued against it. They would say, "Hey, we're here. There's a legal basis for us to be here." Um, but national self-determination and resistance against foreign occupiers is recognized within the UN Charter. So, I don't think that they would be terrorists. Also, there were members of the Hungarian armed forces who were taking part in the Hungarian uprising. So again, since they would be legitimate uh, uh, military formations, so again, uh, it wasn't just simply civilians taking up guns. But again, even if it is just civilians taking up guns, I mean, they are resisting a foreign occupation. Um, um, so Stacy Lewis says, "See, George, these people are not your friends. One day, dining with them, laughing it up, having fun. The next day, it's one against many. They were supposed to be friendly." No, and I think that was the point of in this film is that this was a treacherous war. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, they're there, pretending to be your friend, but when the moment you know comes, boom, they they're ready to kill you. And I think that was the point they were making is that, oh, hey, look, isn't it nice, a pretty girl? Yeah, she's pretty, and then she's happy to kill her lover, who's a British officer. It was the nature of that war. And um, so to ask, how long until Israel breaks the deal? Yeah, that's a very 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 pertinent, very very pertinent question. Yeah, how long does the ceasefire last? Um, S.A. Dillendam says, "Is it correct to interpret your attitude as cynical idealism? You often seem to name Mearsheimer with only partially concealed disdain. The great realist." Yeah, I just don't. I think he's I just I think he's. I mean, he's obviously has some stature. He's a professor at the University of Chicago, but I think it's just so many things that he says that are so dubious, and no one really challenges him. I mean, I mean, all of when he talks about this the story about the Budapest Memorandum, he continues to talk this nonsense about how Ukraine had made a big mistake in 1994 in giving up its nuclear missiles. I mean, how can any professor and somebody of his stature say something so silly? Because Ukraine never had nuclear weapons. I mean, we talked about this so many times here at the Gaggle, but Ukraine never had nuclear weapons. There was no way Ukraine could have retained something that they never had. The nuclear weapons were under Soviet command and they were under Russian command. They were physically they were on the territory of Ukraine, but ultimately they were always under the command of the Russians, and therefore, Ukraine could not have, um, taken control of these weapons, and besides, Ukraine had already committed itself to being a non-nuclear power. It's part of when it declared its state sovereignty in 1990. So for Mearsheimer to peddle this absurdity is I don't know, it's just I don't know. But again, he's entitled to get things wrong, and he does. And the fact is that many of his predictions have not been borne out by events. And again, fair enough. But it would be nice if the people who interview him would challenge him a little bit more. They would bring up, well, you've basically been consistently wrong on most things, in the recent past, both in the war in the Middle East and in the Ukraine. I mean, you know, do you know why? Um, anyway, so it says the U.S. goal isn't to end the war; it's to strategically defeat Russia. Yeah, Trump's just admitting that the war isn't working to that end anymore. He hasn't admitted that. Again, I mean, he hasn't done it at all. Their view is that Biden has made a hash of it. That's I mean they're perfectly entitled to say. I mean, obviously it's been a horrific war, but I haven't Trump hasn't really said anything other than, hey, it wouldn't have happened had I been president. That may or may not be true, but that's more or less what he has said. He's never really spelled out how he intends to bring it to an end, which means that he could go either way. I tend to think that he's going to go with the way of escalate to de-escalate. That's how he's going to rationalize it, rather than the way that the rest of the alt media assume that he's going to kick Ukraine under the bus. I don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, Essie Dillentham says, I think Trump would have got along better with Bill Buckley than he does with Steve Bannon. that may well be. That may well be. Bannon, he I think really is. He is serious about bringing the war in Ukraine to an end. He wants that war brought to an end. But some of the people who are in Bannon world don't think that, including his good friend Dr. Sebastian Gorka. And again, Bannon is he's now picking this fight with Elon Musk. Musk has sort of picked fights with others, but Bannon is, I think, is the one case where somebody has picked a fight with Musk, and I think that's what. There we go. So. Kafir is a forbidden word. that's exactly right. You don't use that. I mean, the Afrikaners used to use that word, but that's definitely now a forbidden word. All right. Let's see. Anyway, I think what we can all learn from this lengthy discussion about Breaker Morant. I wasn't planning on that, but what we can all learn is, first of all, that everybody should go to the locals page, subscribe to the Gaggle. You don't have to pay a subscription fee. It would be very nice if you do, obviously, but you can absolutely go to the subscribe to the Gaggle, the gaggle.locals.com. Watch Breaker Morant. Once you're a member, you're absolutely free to watch it. Read Cynthia's fascinating comments and observations and insights. Absolutely essential to get the full experience, and contribute your own thoughts. As we've seen, we have disagreements about the meaning of the film and the implications of the film. So you can contribute yourself. Think about what you think. Whether you think but I'm right. You think Cynthia's right, or somebody else is right? I mean, so there's a lot there to discuss. It's a film that makes you think, and that's the important. So it's absolutely a very good incentive for anyone to join the Gaggle. So please do that. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you for joining me. Thank you very much for everyone who contributed to the tip jar. That's a very sore point. Wednesday's the day I have to go cap in hand to the dogs and give an account of myself. You thought of the court martial of Breaker Morant was unfair. Getting a grilling from the hounds, that's really unfair. Hey, what would you say you do here? What can you please describe your job? And I can never answer them satisfactorily. Anyway, thank you so much. We will be back Thursday. I hope to see you then. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.